How do you face foundational fears? I guess even a better question might even be, is there a point in facing foundational fears? But the only issue with that secondary question is if we ask that secondary question, most people might just think to themselves, we're not actually tackling the real issue. So let's tackle the real issue and then we'll get into whether it's worth facing foundational fears. So to get started with, I think a great thing for us to do is to think about what are foundational fears. Foundational fears are the real fears, the real things people are afraid of. So when someone in your business mastermind says to you, you need to speak to a new accountant, you need to get yourself a new accountant, and you feel a little bit wheezy, you feel slightly apprehensive because you know you're going to have to start divulging all your financial matters over and over again, which you've already done with your current accountant. That might feel uncomfortable. When a coach you have encourages you to go and get a brand new mortgage broker because the current mortgage brokers you have are telling you this is a problem and that is a problem and this is an issue and that is an issue, whilst your coach and other people in your community are telling you, no, like your situation's better than mine. You can get this faster than mine, and so forth and so forth. You see, those foundational fears come up again. You start feeling apprehensive. You start feeling slightly wheezy because you feel like you're going to have to be explaining your financial situation all over again. Okay. Now, the reality in all of those situations, or the two I gave, we can throw in a third, but you think of your own, right? And maybe comment down below, what situation, scenario have you faced most recently which you started to feel foundational fears come up? Because foundational fears are not the issue of having to explain to the accountant your financial situation again. Foundational fears are not the issue of having to go through your finances with the mortgage broker again. That's not what foundational fear is. You start feeling it in those predicaments, in those instances, but foundational fears are the deep-rooted, deeply seated fears that you've never actually dealt with. And they could come from some weird places. They can come from when you were 6 years old and you were scared by a cat, right? They could come from the weirdest of places. But here's the funniest thing. If we don't tackle foundational fears, those foundational fears get more gears, okay? They come back later on in other years, okay? So it's important for us to understand that buying that next property is probably not your biggest problem. It's important to understand that buying that first property is probably not your biggest problem. Shout out to Aisha. Just had to do that. I'm being a bit extra, but I'm going to do that. So Aisha is one of our next level coaching students who recently just purchased her first house. And when I mentioned, when I mentioned buying your first or your next property is not your biggest issue, I had to shout her out because, when people get married, they say, oh, here's the newest couple on the block, right? They definitely do that in Nigerian culture. I don't know about any other cultures. So, that's that. So as I said that, I thought, well, Aisha's the newest homeowner on the block, so I should give her a shout out, right? Aisha's story is actually quite amazing. And I think I'll share part of it to assist in what I'm speaking about as I break down foundational fears. So Aisha joined our next level coaching program and she invested tens of thousands of pounds to be a part of the program. One of her big things when she joined the program is she wanted to buy a house. And we coached her and showed her how she could buy a house. And then she went and literally recently just bought her house. One of the things that's interesting is the amount she negotiated off of the price from the seller's previous price was literally, I believe, exactly equal to the tens of thousands of pounds she paid to join the program. Okay. So that's super powerful in the first place because I don't believe in coincidence. So there's that. But then secondarily, when Aisha was getting close to the completion of her purchase, I saw her drawing back from the activities that were necessary in order to get the deal over the line. And I didn't say to her, hey, Aisha, you're drawing back. Why? Because I kind of recognize we're dealing with foundational fears. So instead, what I did is what I'm supposed to do and what I do as a coach, right? I coached her. Now, without getting into the intricacies of the coaching and etc., because the issue with that is that will take me so far away from what I'm speaking about. let's get right into this. Now, Aisha started to express in one of our coaching calls that when she started the program, she thought to herself she was a big woman. And she was saying that as she's gone through this transaction and also the process, the coaching process, she's realized there's been so many times where she's felt to herself, maybe I'm not the big woman I thought I was. And one of the things I was super excited about after she completed her purchase was sharing with her, see, Aisha, you are that big woman that you thought you were. You just needed to transform. You just needed to allow things to translate. You just needed to just allow yourself to become who you already saw yourself being. So I want to share that because Aisha's story is in and of itself a masterclass in exactly what I'm speaking about. It's a masterclass in recognizing that if we don't put ourselves inside of certain situations, we don't allow those foundational fears to show themselves. And the reality is, we're not talking about situations that are dangerous for you. We're not talking about situations that are harmful for you, but we are talking about situations that cause you to reveal the fears within you that are a big deal. So those fears, a lot of the time when I engage with them through my coaching clients, are money oriented, okay? Lack oriented, okay? People who fear not having, or people who fear not having enough, or people who fear like there is no abundance in the world. And the reason I wanted to really jump into this with you is because one of the things that I've been recognizing more and more, predominantly from outside of my coaching circles, but I do see it on the odd occasion in my coaching circles, is that people perceive that they can have a lack mentality, but yet orchestrate and create abundance. And one of the things that comes to my mind very strongly, and I feel like I should share this with you, is if you are operating with a lack mindset, if you're operating with a poverty mindset, and you feel right now like you have some form of abundance, imagine what happens when you actually have an abundance mindset. I want you to just think about that for a moment. Because as I'm sharing that, I'm thinking about one of our community members in our Wealth in Words community who has shared several times that she believes that she literally has a issue with money. I'm going to use that language, an issue with money, where she feels as though she doesn't desire to make investments because so many times she thinks she's not going to have any more. And she shared also about her historic past, about her history, and shared in her historic past, she grew up without having much. And she watched her parents, namely one parent who she's mentioned, who hoarded because she didn't have anything, right? And one of the things I shared with this coaching client in our community is, well, if you do the same thing you saw someone else do, your parent, etc., then what do you think is going to happen for your next generation? What do you think your children are going to do? Your children are going to do what they see you do. Your children are out here to emulate you. And if we don't give our children more options, guess what? Our children don't become leaders. Why? Because in the words of John C. Maxwell, leaders always have options. So we have to provide options. And the fastest path to provide options is to be an option-oriented individual. It's to be someone who, yes, puts ourselves in those predicaments where we know those foundational fears are going to arise, but we don't allow those foundational fears to become our demise. We don't say to ourselves, well, I know this is making me feel a little bit queasy, so I'm not going to phone that accountant. Or I know this is making me feel uneasy, so I'm not going to phone that mortgage broker. But instead we say, I will call that accountant and I won't allow the shame or the blame game, all of these kind of weird things that I believe are super prevalent in the UK. I won't allow those things to trap me and stop me from articulating a challenge or problem I have, a current predicament I'm in, which the moment I'm through that predicament, I can actually finally win. And this is what I was just like kind of amped up. Let me be super transparent. I was semi uncomfortable talking about this with you, because I felt to myself as though as I start talking about this, I'm going to feel the same feelings that I'm describing. And the reality is I did start feeling them at the start of the video. And then I started to realize this topic is too important to not talk to you about. This topic is too important to act like this topic is something we should leave out. This topic is the kind of topic when we figure out, everything changes without a doubt. Imagine if you feel as though you have abundance, but you're operating with a poverty mentality. Imagine what really happens when you shift and start operating with the right mentality, an abundance mentality. Let me even call it what it is, an abundance reality. Because the reality is, unfortunately, not according to popular demand in the UK, someone having is not a byproduct of someone else not having. Now, I know there are many economists out there who attempt to paint that picture, but as you study the Bible, as you study the scripture, you start to see that's not the case at all. It's not the case at all. In the first book in the Bible, the book of Genesis, we see something very interesting. We see that the framework, the landscape that God decides to create humanity into and place human beings inside of is a garden. And what is one of the most beautiful things about a garden? One of the most beautiful things about a garden is that a garden is self-populating, okay? A garden is not a place or an environment of scarcity. It's not a place or an environment of lack. A garden is the place where you plant one seed, but the seed gives you everything you need. It gives you a tree. The tree with wood, with bark. The tree with branches, with leaves. The tree with fruit. The tree with perches for birds to make nests. The tree with with crevices and cruxes so squirrels can run up. Like, I want you to understand for a moment, just take a moment and imagine what happens in a garden. In a garden, there's an abundance. There is not a limitation. But what happens is people talk about the economic pie. People talk about how they use analogies of things which are limited to talk about conceptual ideas which are actually unlimited. And if you get out of that mindset, if you forsake that mindset, if you allow the foundational fear of not having enough, not being enough, not wanting enough to actually escape you and elude you, by virtue of the fact that when it comes up, you combat it, and you don't combat it by screaming, oh, I'm not going to be afraid, right? Because many times true courage is feeling the fear and doing it anyway, okay? But if you deal with the fear, I've got a very, very encouraging thing to share with you. Life changes. Life changes because you realize that that thing you thought was fear is not really fear. Because you can't be afraid of something that you've imagined to actually be a problem. Because it's an imagination. And what's beautiful is in the New Testament, in the Bible, there's a verse, it says we should cast down every imagination that attempts to rise up and operate against God, against Christ, against the things that we know are good for our life. So I want you to think about that for a moment. What would happen if every time we had an imagined nation, okay? I want you to think about that word, an imagined nation. Every time we had an imagination that was attempting to stand against, attempting to present itself against, attempting to portray itself against the things we desired, the things we required, the things we were saying are going to help us aspire higher. What would happen if every time you had an imagination that was a foundational fear, if we're using that language, you were able to pull it down and get it out of here? What would happen? What would happen if every time you thought to yourself, you've bought 8 properties, and because you've bought more properties than everyone else around you in your immediate circle, you can't trust anyone and you can't talk to anyone and no one understands you? What would happen if when those imaginations came up, you decided to not allow them to erupt, but instead you recognized those imaginations were corrupt? And you said to yourself, these imaginations are not going to hold me down. These imaginations are not going to stop me from getting around an audience, a group, a mastermind of people who are on the same level or higher. so I can get the information, organization, and transformation I truly desire. You see, there are so many of my coaching clients I've had over the years who were in a similar predicament that I just painted out. Exactly similar predicament to what I just described to you. They were in a position where, because they had more properties, more assets, they had produced more quote unquote results than the immediate people around them. Those immediate people always came to them for advice. Those immediate people always came to them for answers. Those immediate people always came to them to develop their awareness. So for them personally, they felt as though they were living in a world where it's all about lack. Why? Because everyone around them is taking, and no one around them is making. And what happens for many of those clients when they find some way to connect with me, maybe it's because there's a problem in their portfolio, which in the past was most of the case of how these people would hear about me or find out about me. I would reveal to them some simple secrets, and what would happen is those small keys would open the big doors, and they'd start to receive insights and start to realize there's so much more. They'd start to recognize there are communities out there of people in the similar predicament to you. There are communities out there of people who have been in the predicament you're in, and they've found a way to win. There are, unfortunately, let me even throw this group out there as well. There are communities out there of people who are in the same predicament you're in, but have decided not to win by virtue of them not taking any productive action. By virtue of them not saying, I'm going to take a step so I'm no longer the smartest person in the room, as many people have used as an analogy. So when we have foundational fears, the first thing that it's of value for us to recognize is 9 times out of 10, they're not even connected to the thing in which they're coming up for. They're not connected to the fact that someone asked you about property. They're not connected to the fact that someone advised you to speak to a new accountant. They're not connected to that. They're connected to sometimes insecurities. They're connected to the fact that sometimes we just don't feel bold enough about stepping out of the room where we are the smartest person in the room to step into a room where we are now, we're the learner. We got the L plates on, right? We ain't even got the P for just pass. We've literally got the L plates on, and it makes us feel uncomfortable. And here's something that I want to share with you. Just remember that feeling uncomfortable is not the same as feeling vulnerable. You may feel vulnerable because you're uncomfortable, but feeling uncomfortable and feeling vulnerable are slightly two different things, okay? But there's more. Just remember that feeling uncomfortable and feeling frightened are not the same thing. And why is it important to make these distinguishments? The reason it's important to make these distinguishments is because if we don't recognize these things are different, we won't be alert, aware, or discerning when each of these things are happening. We can very quickly wrap 3 or 4 different things up together, and every time we feel any of them, say to ourselves, we're feeling all of them, or say to ourselves, we're feeling another one of them. And this is why it's so important to recognize the difference between things. The difference between, for example, to make it super clear, joy and happiness. Okay, I remember once someone said happiness is based on happenings. Okay, joy is not, right? Now, if you think about that and you just break that down, guess what happens? You start realizing when you are quote unquote happy versus when you have quote unquote joy. And guess why that's valuable to you? It's valuable to you because you stop living for, maybe in this example, quote unquote happiness, and you start living with joy. Unspeakable joy, as the Bible talks about it, right? It's the same in all of these other cadres. It's the same with fear. So many people face foundational fears and don't recognize that it's actually not a fear sometimes. Sometimes it's just anxiety. Sometimes you're just anxious about something. Sometimes you have an imagination or an imagined nation about something that you're dealing with, and you allow that imagined nation to become a reality until it becomes a fatality. And the reality is you can disarm an imagined nation because you recognize it's an imagined nation. It's not real. It's not a reality, so it doesn't have to become a fatality. So whilst you're there sitting saying, oh, I don't feel comfortable sharing all my situation with this brand new accountant. I don't feel comfortable sharing all my portfolio predicament with this mortgage broker. I don't feel comfortable divulging what I've been doing in my cash flow situation with this coach. Here's my question to you. How are you going to find the dream team that take you from where you are to where you desire to be if you're not willing to develop with somebody? If teamwork truly makes the dream work, then a great question we should ask ourselves is, who is that team? And if that team is a team of players you have already assembled, then you would already be on par, on trajectory to your dream. But when you recognize you're not en route to your dream, guess what you have to also understand? I need to work on the assembly of my team. And it's really simple to do that. How is it simple to do that? It's simple to do that because there's an enemy out there. Okay. Now, I'm an avid reader of the Bible, so I'm just going to give it to you like this. In the book of John, chapter 10, John chapter 10, verse 10, it says, the thief comes not but to steal, to kill, and to destroy. What does that mean? That means those imagined nations that rise up and attempt to take you away, derail you, and cause you to fail. Those imaginations are coming from somewhere. They're not just made up. They're not bamboozled imaginations. They're imagined nations from a thief who has an intention to steal from you. So when you start feeling uncomfortable about sharing your predicament with a potential new team member who could help you to move further, faster in your future, when you start feeling uncomfortable about sharing your situation with a team member who can help you move further, faster in your future, guess what? That is most likely that imagined nation coming from a thief who intends to steal, kill, or destroy you. And one of the ways, cheat code, pro tip, all right, impact key, one of the ways you can assist yourself in those predicaments is ask yourself the most powerful question about these predicaments, and that is, what is the worst that could happen? What's the worst that can happen? Let me tell you, what's the worst that can happen is a great question. But if you want the pro tip, okay, the better question is, what's the best that could happen? What would happen if, and then just fill in the blank with the best outcome that could be the case. And let me tell you what's going to start happening to you. You're going to start pulling down imagined nations as though you can't live anywhere else except for in a positive nation. You're going to pull them all down. You are going to literally tear them down because you're going to start tuning into the frequency of success for yourself. When you don't just stop at what's the worst that can happen, but you shift gears into what is the best that could happen. And then you take the answer from that question and substitute it into the statement, what is it going to look like when, and you just say that positive outcome at the end. That's how you combat fear. That's how you tackle fear. That's how you deal with fear. That's how you disarm fear. So the next time you feel as though a foundational fear is rising up because you have to do something that's going to further your dream, you have to do something that's going to develop your team, I'm here to tell you it's simple. Ask yourself the first question, what's the worst that can happen? Ask yourself this second question, what's the best thing that could happen? And then finalize your process by substituting the best thing that can happen inside of the sentence. I can't wait until this happens, or it's going to be so cool when this happens, or I'm looking forward to when this happens. And what will happen is that imagined nation will be disarmed and you will no longer be harmed by the foundational fear because it will lose all its gear. So with that being said, Sammy I Can Win signing out. If you got value in this video, I'd love for you to share with me in the comments what your thoughts are, your key takeaways, what stood out to you. If this is the kind of content that you like, then be sure to hit subscribe, press like, to show that you like it. And then side by side with that, if there's one person that comes to your mind as you've gone through this content or as you're thinking over this content, feel free to share this video with them, because sharing is caring. As I usually say, remember, small keys open big doors. Samuel I Can Win. I'm signing out. Good day. God bless. Let's go.